So, welcome to the Law, Policing and Justice Podcast, episode 11, and I hope you're all well. My name is Noreen Chowdhury. I am the Supervising Solicitor leading the Legal Advice Centre at the University of East London. So, in today's episode, we'll be looking at a glimpse of life as a civil litigator with Chun Wong. Today, we are delighted to be joined by Chun Wong. Hi, Chun Wong.
Hello, everybody.
Chun Wong is a highly experienced solicitor from Hodge Jones and Allen. Chun joined the firm back in 2007 after qualifying and practising at a local firm in Camden. Chun specialises in civil litigation and has over a decade of experience handling a wide range of disputes from professional negligence cases involving solicitors, barristers and architects to property disputes and contentious probate claims. Chun has appeared in County Court, the High Court and the Court of Appeal, acting for both claimants and defendants. Her deep understanding of litigation combined with her commercial awareness and dedication to resolving disputes efficiently for clients makes her an exceptional voice in her field. We are excited to have her here today to share her insights and experiences and to give us a better understanding of what it's like to work in civil litigation. Thank you so much, Chun, for joining us on the podcast, and thank you for joining the team at the Legal Advice Centre.
Thank you for having me.
So, Chun, I will let our students introduce themselves and then they'll put their questions forward to you. Over to you all.
Hi, I'm Alex. I'm a first year law student.
Hi, I'm Kevin Tatsar and I'm a business law student.
Hello, my name is Noye and I am a final year law student.
Hi, my name is Gavia and I'm a final law student.
Hello, my name is Randy. I'm a first year LLB law student at UL. John, if I could just start off with the questions, if that's okay. First of all, what inspired you to pursue a career in law and how did you come to specialize in civil disputes?
To be fair, before I did A-levels, I actually hadn't even considered a career in law because I was the first person in my family to go to university. I didn't actually know any lawyers, so law wasn't actually a career I had considered. But my form tutor, when I went to college, suggested it, and I thought, well, it sounded quite interesting. It was a very intellectual subject. And so then I did a A-level in law, actually. I thought, actually, I really do like the analytical side of law. And I like reading, I like thinking critically, I like solving complex problems, and I just like applying logic to real-life problems. So after that, I then did work experience in local firms to get a better idea of what law involved. And actually, for me, it opened up doors about how you can use law for justice and social change. So my parents are refugees from Vietnam, and so I understand for minority groups how having a voice is very important, and the law was a very good tool to do that. So then I followed a very traditional route to get into law. So I did a law degree at LAC, I then did the LPC at the College of Law, and then I did 2 years training contract at a firm called Osborne's in Camden Town. So at the time, when I was studying law, I actually thought I wanted to do family law. So I did a seat in family law, I also did a seat in private client, personal injury and social housing. And when I did a seat in family, I actually realised I wasn't cut out for family, but I really, really enjoyed social housing. I really liked civil litigation, and so that's what I qualified into. So I qualified into social housing with Osborne's, and I stayed there for about 18 months. And then there was an advert at Hodge Jones and Allen for a civil litigation lawyer. And at the time, I wanted to challenge myself. I wanted to do a broader range of civil litigation areas. And I thought because I was quite junior, that was the time to make the change before I'd become too specialist and before it was too hard to move jobs. So that's where the journey started.
That's amazing. That's very interesting. Thank you very much for that. My second question to you is, you've been with Hodge Jones and Allen since 2007. How has your role evolved over the years, and what have been some key of the milestones for you?
So as I said, I was about 18 months qualified when I joined Hodge Jones and Allen, and actually I was the first member of the dispute resolution team. So basically it was myself, and I was very eager to learn, but it was a very steep learning curve because there was a lot of things that I didn't know, so it was very daunting. doing areas that you don't know, but also very challenging. And to be fair, that's why I still love my job. It's because every day is different. Even now, I still learn new areas of law. I still come across cases that I've never done before. So it keeps you on your toes. And I was very fortunate that I was supervised, and the head of our team was Patrick Allen, who was our founding partner. So he taught me everything I know, not just about the law, but how to practice law with courage and compassion and integrity. So Patrick operated a very open door policy. My questions were never too silly, never too small. And so, he taught me everything I know, as I said. And then eventually I was promoted through the ranks all the way up to partner. And I now head up the dispute resolution team. So it started with myself, and we've now got about 10 people in the team. So I'm very proud of our team. But as I have gone up the ranks, my role has changed in that I do also a lot more management in the firm. So I deal with the complaints for the firm, I deal with claims for the firm, I deal with the cost issue, enforcement issues. I'm the firm's compliance officer, and also I'm an equity partner, a director, a board member. So there's a lot of hats I have to wear in the firm. But, I am very, very lucky to work at a firm where my gender and my race hasn't defined me as a lawyer. So I got married, I had my 2 kids when I was at Hodge Jones and Allen, and so I've personally grown as well as a lawyer, and I've never felt any of that has held me back. And the firm is probably about 70% women, which is probably quite unusual, but I'm very, very proud to work at a firm that's so diverse and inclusive, particularly with our strong ethos for social justice. Thank you.
And a third question for you. For listeners who might not be familiar, could you explain what civil litigation involves and what types of disputes you typically handle?
So civil litigation is a very wide term, but it basically covers any dispute which needs to be resolved in a civil court, as opposed to, say, for example, a family court or a criminal court. And it can range from personal injury, housing, contentious probate. So they're all civil litigation cases. And the type of cases we deal with includes contentious probate, as I've mentioned, professional negligence, property type disputes, contract, debt enforcement, data protection and privacy, commercial disputes. So as you can see, it's quite wide.
And another question for you. You often deal with professional negligence claims. What are some of the common challenges you come across?
I think sometimes it's hard to explain to clients who have been let down by a professional that there's not always a viable claim which results in compensation for them. I think they need to understand, even if there was a duty of care that was owed to them and there was breach of that duty, that doesn't always lead to a recoverable loss. Sometimes that's not enough, particularly if the negligence is not the main factor which leads to their losses. For example, we get a lot of clients who want to bring a claim against a family solicitor, for example, because they've lost their case. But unfortunately, sometimes, although the family solicitor may have been negligent, there were other factors which led to them losing their case. So it's hard to manage their expectations, as a bad service doesn't always equate to negligence. And then sometimes the other side may have no funds. Even if you win the case and you get judgment, that's only half the battle. Not all the opponents will have money to satisfy a judgment. As I said, a lot of work goes to managing client expectations of what we can actually achieve within the limitations of the law.
Okay, thank you. You have experience with disputes over property ownership and tenancy issues. What advice would you give to individuals facing this kind of disputes?
With most disputes, but particularly these type of disputes, it's very important to get your paperwork in order. And that usually where issues arise is where you don't have things documented. particularly over ownership. So what we find a lot of is there's very informal discussions because it's a family setting. Everybody trusts everybody else, so it doesn't matter whose name the property is in, and there's no records, and then a dispute arises later on that the property is in husband's name, but actually the wife made a contribution, and then there are issues then when that relationship breaks down. So I would say always, if you are thinking about entering into those types of relationships or contracts, is get advice early on, particularly from a professional. Don't try and do this yourself by Googling it, using ChatGPT, because you will save a lot of costs later on and heartache later on by getting professional advice from the start. And particularly because laws in this area, particularly around landlords and tenants, change a lot. So it gets out of date very quickly. And obviously, if you don't know the current position in relation to the law, then there can be quite serious consequences. One tip I always say to clients is always make sure you've got insurance. So make sure you've got proper insurance, particularly legal expense insurance, so that when there is a legal dispute, your insurance will provide funding for you to get legal advice from a solicitor. And it's always useful to have that before the dispute has arisen, because your insurers won't cover retrospective disputes.
Okay, thank you. It's very helpful advice. Second question is, could you tell us more about contentious probate cases? What typically causes disputes over wills or inheritance?
So some of the types of contentious probate cases that we deal with is contesting a will. That's the most typical type, either because they think that the deceased didn't have capacity to execute that will, or they didn't understand what they were signing because English wasn't their first language, or actually they didn't even sign the will, so somebody's forged their signature, or there was undue influence in making the deceased execute the will. Other claims include what we call Inheritance Act claims. So in certain circumstances where either the will, or if there's no will, the rules of intestacy doesn't provide financial provision for a certain type of claimants, then they might be able to make a claim, and the judge would then order reasonable financial provision to be made for them under the estate. Other typical claims would be where a interested party, such as a beneficiary, wants to remove the personal representative who is dealing with the administration of the estate, or they want a proper account of the estate as to how it's been administered. And we also deal with claims on behalf of the estate. So the estate might be defending the Inheritance Act claim, or they might be bringing other types of litigation. For example, if there's a property in the estate, somebody's staying in that property, they're refusing to move, we would then have to get possession of that property so that we could sell the property, liquidate and distribute. In order to avoid these types of disputes, my advice is always make sure you have a will. And that doesn't matter what age you are, or you don't have to be, very old to need a will. It's just about good planning. Ideally, you want a professional, ideally a solicitor, to help you draft a will to avoid any issues later. But also because if something does go wrong later and you've instructed a solicitor to draft the will, you've also got the benefit of the indemnity insurance. So if something goes wrong, you can sue the solicitors and there will be the ability to seek compensation. Whereas obviously, if you've done it through the internet, or you've downloaded it, or you bought it from WH Smith and it goes wrong, then there's no recourse for that. If you are making a will, I would try and not appoint family members to be the personal representatives, because in my line of work, we see it day in and day out, is that they fall out. There's going to be arguments, there's going to be litigation because they don't get on. As much as you want to believe it would never happen to your family and you would never fall out over money, unfortunately, I get very cynical in this area of law. We see it so many times. As soon as the parents passed away, the siblings are already fighting about it the next day. And sometimes it's not just about your family members, but, they've got friends, they've got partners who have an influence over them. And so I would try and appoint somebody neutral. You can appoint solicitors to be your personal representative just to avoid those issues coming up. And I would make sure that you record in writing, ideally, the reason why you have set out the will as you have, why you've distributed in that way. So usually you'll have a letter of wishes to accompany your will to explain your decisions, and also make sure you've told everybody what's in your will and you've explained why this is. You've told everybody where your will is kept, because sometimes there'll be issues locating your will, and so nobody will understand where it is, how to find it. Don't put it, underneath floorboards where nobody's going to find it. Ideally, if you get a solicitor to draft it, your solicitor will hold the will, and you can get your will registered, although it's not compulsory. There's a wills register, so you should get that done as well, so they can search for it and leave instructions about what needs to be done. Sometimes your will might not cover practical things, like what your funeral wishes might be, but again, we see quite a lot of those types of disputes where people are fighting over who should sit where at the funeral, what are they going to do with the body, what flowers are they going to have, It sounds, very petty, and it sounds like, surely people don't fight about these things, but they do, unfortunately. So, yes.
So you have worked with clients under various funding arrangements. How do these funding options impact access to justice?
So I've been doing this quite a long time, and when I first started in this area of law in civil litigation, there was a lot more availability of legal aid. So contentious probate and professional negligence were areas where you could get legal aid. But since 2012, that is no longer the case, and they are out of scope. And not all clients are aware of this. I think they think, if I'm on state benefits and I pass the mean test, then why can't I get legal aid for all areas of law? But unfortunately, that's not how it works. You have to also be in scope to get legal aid. And so what that means is that for clients who cannot afford to pay privately, then they have to rely on solicitors who are prepared to offer what we call no-win, no-fee arrangements. And not all solicitors will be prepared to do that, because obviously they take a risk that if they, invest in the time, they put a lot of work into it, they get to the end, and litigation is risky, so nobody can guarantee you're going to win that case. And so if you lose that case, then the solicitors will have lost out on a lot of time and obviously money. So not all solicitors are prepared to take that risk. And unfortunately, that means that the average client is left at the mercy of organisations like the CAB, law centres, and now obviously a growing trend is the university clinic. So these organisations have to plug that gap where there is no access to justice for clients who want to seek advice in those type of areas.
Litigation can be stressful for clients. How do you support clients emotionally and practically through the legal process?
So we try to break everything down for them. So both in terms of language, making sure that they understand the complicated legal terminology, terms. We try to explain the process to them. We try to be upfront about costs, breaking those down into stages, and also next steps. We always have to have our clients' best interests at heart, and certainly for me, it's not always about winning. I know that sounds strange for a civil litigator, but actually avoiding litigation is, in my view, the best option for most clients, because litigation is expensive. It takes a very long time because of the way that the courts are under-sourced and the way the courts work. So it's about securing an outcome for the clients that they can live with so that they can move on with their lives, because litigation is also stressful, it's emotionally draining, and some clients, I think, underestimate the stress of litigation itself.
Have you noticed any emerging trends or changes in the types of disputes people are bringing to court in recent years?
In my experience, most cases don't actually make it to court. I would say probably 9 out of 10 cases would settle before it ever makes its way to a final hearing. But I do think people are getting more litigious and they are embarking on the legal process more. So, for example, in contentious probate claims, I think there is certainly a growing trend of people who are bringing those type of claims, whether it's because people are more aware of those type of claims, or because the estates are now worth more money, because generally they involve a property, and property prices have shot up in the last 10, 20 years. So now there's something worth fighting about, whereas 20 years ago, property might be worth £50,000. 20 years later, that's going to be worth £1 million. And so they're more willing to bring claims. And I don't know if it is a generational thing, but certainly I think there is a sense of entitlement from people who think because they are related to the deceased that they must get something from the estate. Why should they leave it to the cat's home? You know, why shouldn't they get something because they're of blood? So again, they're wanting to fight these type of cases more.
Finally, what advice would you give to law students or aspiring solicitors intending in pursuing a career in civil litigation?
As I said, studying an area isn't always the same as practicing the area. So I would say get experience to see whether civil litigation really is for you, because it's very different. Volunteer at clinics like the university clinic so you can get first-hand experience. Maybe go and see some cases. So if the cases are heard in county courts, high courts, they're in open court, you can pop in and listen to those type of cases. I would read up on cases, see what type of areas in civil litigation you're interested in, because civil litigation is very, very wide. So there's lots of different types of civil litigation, and so you might be interested in one particular type of civil litigation as opposed to another. The good thing about civil litigation is that because it's so broad, but essentially they run very similar procedures and rules, particularly in the court process, is that it is easier to move around within civil litigation. So like I said, if you're a housing solicitor, you can probably move over to be a personal injury solicitor because they all follow the civil procedure rules, and the court process is very similar, but I would get as much exposure as I could.
Thank you so much for that, Chun. So that's all we have time for today, and thank you, Chun, for coming in, and thank you to our lovely students for putting the questions forward. To our listeners, thank you for listening in, and we will be back, and stay connected. If you do wish to get involved with our Law, Policing and Justice podcast, please email the Legal Advice Centre at uel.ac.uk. If you wish to explore more on the Law, Policing and Justice courses, please visit www.uel.ac.uk. And as always, thank you so much for listening, and stay well.